Khalil Herbert versus D'Onta Foreman will be the most exciting battle at Chicago Bears training camp. And we can't leave the rookie Roschon Johnson out of the conversation either.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And on the show today, we continue our training camp previews, now looking at the running back position. A starting job up for grabs, really one of the main few positions on this team up for grabs. Number one running back, Khalil Herbert versus D'Onta Foreman, the young incumbent versus the outsider. And we can't leave Roschon Johnson out of that conversation, at least not the conversation for playing time. Maybe not quite week one starter, but he's got to have a role in here. And we also need to figure out who's going to play on third down, with neither Herbert nor Foreman specializing in that role. Does Travis Homer make a little carve out for himself in an opportunity here? Is there a shot for Trestan Ebner to still stick on this 53-man roster? A lot to get through at the running back position. You'll notice as we've gone through these training camp previews throughout this process, we started with special teams and safety, working our way back towards the quarterback. We've skipped tight end up to this point because on tomorrow's podcast, we're going to be joined by former NFL tight end Khalil Herbert, who's going to come on the podcast to talk about Cole Kmet, Robert Tonyan, the tight end market. So that's going to be an exciting conversation. I hope you will come back for that one tomorrow as we get in the tight end position with someone who knows it a heck of a lot better than I do. But on the running backs, Herbert versus Foreman. This to me is going to be a really interesting battle, and one that will certainly have a winner, but I am curious how much of a winner will actually be declared, or what form that will look like this upcoming season. You have Foreman coming in, who started the second half of last season for the Carolina Panthers after the trade of Christian McCaffrey, and rushed for almost 1,000 yards across basically 9 starts, almost in half a season. He rushed for 914 yards when he became the workhorse lead running back there. And then you've got Khalil Herbert, who played second fiddle to David Montgomery for the majority of the season there. I think Montgomery maybe missed a game in there. But Herbert had a couple of really big rushing performances and 731 yards and led the NFL in yards per carry. And when you slice and dice a lot of different running back metrics, Khalil Herbert was like the most efficient running back in the NFL last season in a lot of different areas. And it's pretty impressive statistically what he was able to do last year. So you can see Foreman as a borderline 1,000-yard guy who looked like a starter in Carolina. You could see him coming to Chicago, picking up where he left off, and earning that starting job and kind of running with it. You could also see Khalil Herbert perhaps on the cusp of a breakout season and really starting to break out a little bit behind David Montgomery last season. Montgomery gone, Herbert takes over, is the incumbent, and I think the early favorite to be the starter as a result, and can take that to the next level. I mean, we've talked about Herbert a few times this offseason on the podcast. Before free agency, I came on here and I made the case that I think Herbert could be a 1,000-yard rusher in this offense. I think he was a back that I feel comfortable with making the number one running back, while still maybe wanting to add someone who can add a little bit more in terms of the passing game, receiving and blocking out of the backfield. But still, like, as your lead runner, I think he's easily capable of being a true 1,000-yard rusher in the NFL with home run speed every time you hand off the ball. Foreman was signed in free agency and is not that pass-catching, pass protector out of the backfield, but is another sturdy, solid, consistent runner of the football, a little bit more of a physical runner as far as like a little less long speed and explosiveness in that sort of way, but not a slow running back by any means. That's not, we can't think of Foreman as this total bruiser, but he is a little bit bigger and a little in terms of like thickness and strength and just like body weight compared to a Khalil Herbert. So it's a little bit of the thunder and lightning, but not quite, as drastic as, you might hear the narrative suggested there. I do think, though, the two running backs have a similar style, have a different style in a way that I'm curious how Foreman adjusts to the Bears' offense. Herbert was here. Herbert knows how it works, and it has worked very well for him schematically. Foreman comes from a Carolina Panthers offense that tended to run a little bit more of what they would call like gap scheme runs. The Bears more of this stretch outside zone style of running where everybody's moving horizontally, some inside zone too, where the running back makes one cut and go. Foreman in the Panthers offense was running, more of like your traditional like power runs, where you pull the guard and follow him through the hole, and there's not as much of like trying to read the gap, but really just everything is directed at one gap, and it becomes less of a read and more of just reading off of like one blocker as opposed to reading the whole offensive line and finding your gaps there. And that typically has not been what Luke Getsy's offense has relied on, but he's not married to just like one way of doing things and can certainly mix things up. So I'm curious if Getsy could see Foreman as like an opportunity to experiment more in the running game and do more of those things that he was successful doing in Carolina, or if Foreman will just have to adjust and fit more with the Bears' style of rushing and do more of the stretch zone plays that he certainly did some of in Carolina. And doesn't mean he's, a bad scheme fit by any means. It's just perhaps an adjustment in terms of what he's going to be asked to do more often as a ball carrier. I am curious how that's going to play into the third down conversation that I want to have in a little bit, because that was also something he was not asked to do much of at all in Carolina. And that's going to be an interesting part of this dynamic. But I'm still left feeling like Herbert, as the incumbent, as the guy who knows the offense better, and as the guy who statistically, like on efficiency standpoints, was more productive than Foreman last season. Foreman had more total yards because he had more total carries and more opportunities and a bigger role in his offense. Herbert was on a snap-per-snap basis, breaking more tackles, creating more yards after contact, and making more explosive plays, and having fewer plays stuffed in the backfield as well, and being able to get more out of what his offensive line was giving him, even than David Montgomery was. So I think it's an open competition. I think ultimately, whoever ends up as the starter and whoever ends up the backup, they're both going to get playing time, the way we saw A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones really both get fairly similar playing time in terms of snaps and in terms of carries in the Packers offense under Luke Getsy. I'm expecting something similar for Herbert and Foreman. But the Packers' two running back strategy didn't have room for a third running back like a Roschon Johnson potentially in the mix. And Roschon might be a better third running back than Green Bay ever had behind A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones. So we'll look at where that rookie might fit in this conversation next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by our new friends at eBay Motors. They've teamed up with Locked On fantasy football host Vinny Iyer to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week all season long. Whether you're prepping for a draft or during the season scouting the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you with players that are a guaranteed fit on your roster. So with your fantasy football draft prep underway for the upcoming season, let's see who Vinny's picked out for us on this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. If you're looking to make a smooth turn in fantasy football snake drafts, maybe you got the last pick in the first round and the first pick in the second round, you can catch an initial spark for your roster by revving up with two elite NFC East wide receivers. How about Dallas Cowboys' CeeDee Lamb and the Philadelphia Eagles' A.J. Brown? They're a perfect guaranteed fit to count on Lamb driving Dak Prescott and Dallas's new look passing game to big numbers, and Brown revving up Jalen Hurts' downfield throwing often again in Philadelphia. Vinny Iyer from Locked On Fantasy Football is going to help you with your fantasy championship, and eBay Motors knows that a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. The same thing is true for your vehicle. With eBay Guaranteed Fit and over 122 million parts and accessories for your vehicles right at your fingertips, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. We're talking air filters, brakes, batteries, taillights, alternators, shocks, struts, you name it. eBay Motors has it, and they'll make sure it's the right fit for your car, because eBay's Guaranteed Fit helps you understand exactly what part you need for your vehicle the first time. So go forth, switch gears, crank the AC, and say goodbye to sweating if your ride needs a little fixing up, because now you'll know you always get set up for success from the get-go with eBay's Guaranteed Fit. Everything your vehicle is calling for is just a click away. For the parts and accessories that fit your vehicle, just look for the green check. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices at ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. The training camp battle at running back feels like a two-man race between Herbert and Foreman because they both look ready to be NFL starters. They're both feeling like on the precipice of guys who can take a step forward with a bigger opportunity. Both guys did really well, not as the full-time starter for their respective teams last season, now both competing with the opportunity to be more of that full-time starter. But we don't want to discount the rookie running back Roschon Johnson coming in from Texas because he's a guy that I really feel like will someday be the Chicago Bears starting running back. It's a question of when, not if. And I feel like it's not, as much as I have high expectations for Roschon Johnson, it doesn't feel like super reasonable to expect, keyword here is like have expectations for the rookie fourth round pick to come in to his first training camp learning the offense and become the starter. Regardless of who's ahead of him on the depth chart, like in almost any case, it's not realistic for a rookie fourth round pick to expect them to be the starter. It happens. And to me, that is exceeding expectations if you can get a rookie fourth round running back come in and be your starting running back. But it feels like especially not reasonable expectations, especially unlikely then, that not only is he ready to be a starting running back right away as a fourth round pick rookie, but that he also then beats out two promising, ascending, young running backs ahead of him on the depth chart in Khalil Herbert and D'Onta Foreman, guys who have a lot more NFL experience than him. Herbert certainly having a lot more experience in this offense than him. And Foreman played for Tennessee 2 seasons ago, and 2 and 3 seasons ago, the last 2 years before Carolina, in a similar offensive scheme as Luke Getsy, teammates of Bears right guard Nate Davis. So it should be a pretty easy pickup for Foreman to get up to speed here. Roschon Johnson is playing from behind from all of those guys. And that's okay, right? They're not drafting Roschon Johnson in the 4th round expecting him to be a starter right away. Again, I do feel like that's the kind of potential he has. And he's never going to be the speedster that Khalil Herbert is. He ran almost a 4.6, like 4.58, high 4.5s at the NFL scouting combine in the 40-yard dash. Again, not like the perfect measurement of a player's speed exactly, but he is more of, that power back, a little bit more of a bruiser. He's tough, he's smart, he's reliable. You know what you're going to get down in and down out, even if he maybe doesn't have the top end, juice at the running back position. He still feels like a guy that you can put out there and trust down in and down out, that he's going to get you, when it's 3rd and 3, he's going to get you your 3 or 4 yards. He's going to make the right decision. He's going to make the right read. He's going to take advantage of everything that the offensive line is able to give him. Maybe you wonder how much more than that he's able to get, but certainly at the very least, you can expect him to get everything the offensive line is going to give him. Perhaps his way onto the field as a rookie, or at least right away in his rookie season, is with his ability a little bit more as a pass blocker and a little bit more as a receiver compared to Herbert and Foreman, which I want to get into a little bit more in just a moment. But I do wonder, is there room for a third running back to get carries here? Because I don't think week 1, right? I don't think you're going to see an even 3-way split week 1 between all 3 of those running backs. But over the course of a season, certainly if there is an injury to either Herbert or Foreman, that's a great path for Roschon Johnson to get up to speed there. Or, over the course of the year, does Roschon just continue to impress? And, is there, say, a limited ceiling, like on Foreman? I think Roschon fits more into the Foreman skill set. Roschon's never going to have the speed to pair with Herbert, but if Herbert can be the more explosive speedster type guy, home run threat, can Roschon get better and better and maybe try and offer you more upside than Foreman, especially if he can start building some momentum as a receiver, as a blocker in certain passing situations that we'll talk about again, and slowly then start to earn more carries as a result of the progress that he makes and the time that he's able to earn via other areas of his game that are stronger than some of the guys ahead of him on the depth chart. And I also think back to Luke Getsy in Green Bay even earlier, when younger A.J. Dillon and younger Aaron Jones, when they had Jamal Williams, and they did have 3 running backs at that time, it was like 200 carries for Aaron Jones, 120 for Jamal Williams, 46 for A.J. Dillon. Like, could that be closer to the threshold that we see for the Bears, where, maybe Herbert gets 175 carries and Foreman gets 150, and then Roschon gets 50. And maybe those 50 end up coming a little bit closer towards the end of the season. And as the year goes on, Foreman's carries go down and down and down, and Roschon's go up and up. Or maybe Khalil Herbert's come down too. Like, I'm not trying to specifically pinpoint Foreman here. I just think Foreman and Roschon are closer in build and skill set than Foreman and Herbert, certainly. Although they certainly don't want to say that Foreman and Johnson are like identical or super similar in that way. And so I just wonder if slowly you see that transition start to happen this year, because Foreman is here on a 1-year deal and was not a part of this roster last season. Doesn't have longer ties to this offense or this team. Not that like Khalil Herbert is, quote unquote, guaranteed a bunch of playing time, but everybody's just more familiar with what's going on here and has a better connection with the coaching staff. And again, Foreman on a 1-year deal, you want to start transitioning to Roschon Johnson taking over that role by next season. Certainly that feels like a pretty more reasonable expectations for a 4th-round pick to eventually take over as the lead back in this backfield. But I do think he should be able to find some playing time in passing situations and on 3rd down. And that might be the biggest question mark of this running back group moving into this regular season, is who's going to be on the field when it's 3rd and long, or even 2nd and long, or 4th down and you need to pass. Which running back do you trust in that situation to be a balance of ability to pass protect if you need him to, but also the ability to catch the ball out of the backfield, make guys miss after the catch, and be a threat, a consistent threat in the passing game? We'll look at where Roschon Johnson might fit into that, and Travis Homer as well, who we can't overlook completely here either, next on Locked On Bears. We know last season the big weakness for Khalil Herbert was, really passing situations in general, but we saw him struggle with the pass protection aspect of things pretty mightily. And I do hesitate with that a little bit, only because with running backs in pass protection, we often really notice the bad plays and then don't notice the good ones. And, so like you could think of, like, in your head, you might be able to think of like 1 or 2 examples of like, man, Khalil Herbert got ran over there or was completely useless as a pass blocker. And very much like a very real concern about his game. I think that's a valid criticism of Khalil Herbert. But I also keep in mind, like, he pass blocked 32 times last season. Like, that's not a lot of a sample size in general. And over the course of that, I think he gave up 4 pressures. So like 4 out of 32 is still not good. That's not a good rate. But like, let's not make it seem like every time he was on the field, he was getting completely bulldozed and was useless there. And let's also not discount the idea that he can get better at that, and that he could come into training camp this season, have worked on it all offseason, continue to work on it, and be a more effective pass protector in the backfield. He does not have to be static as a player, can improve in areas that he struggles in and can get better. But it's interesting because, okay, that's Herbert's weakness. And you look at Foreman in Carolina, and he too was like not a 3rd down back at all. Even when Christian McCaffrey was there, and McCaffrey was the starter and Foreman was the backup, he was still not the 3rd down back there. They went with Chuba Hubbard as their 3rd down back almost exclusively, like in a way that like I was running the numbers on it and was kind of almost like really surprised that like last season, D'Onta Foreman as a receiver ran 118 routes, and 6 of those came on 3rd down. Like he had 9 total 3rd down passing snaps all season. 3 blocking plays, 6 route runs on 3rd downs in particular. Khalil Herbert had 48 3rd down plays. Foreman had 9. So it's a very small sample size for D'Onta Foreman, and it was not what I would consider like a strong sample size. That's kind of how I would categorize that there. Like so I don't think you come in with this like faith then that Foreman can excel or grow into that role. I mean, he's never had more than 9 catches in a season. He did have 123 yards 2 years ago, but like he's never been a consistent receiver out of the backfield. And I don't think of him as a guy who's been a consistent pass protector. Never, just something he's not asked to do a bunch, and struggled with it a couple times when he had to do that last season. So neither of your top two running backs that are going to be your primary ball carriers have proven up to this point a consistency to contribute in the passing game as a receiver or as a blocker. Great opportunity then for Roschon Johnson, the rookie, because he looked like a fairly consistent, like one of the best pass blocking running backs in this draft class, which is kind of a niche field there, but still something he did very well as the backup to Bijan Robinson, the Texas running back last season that was ahead of him on the depth chart. And I think Roschon has some upside as a receiver there as well. Like, again, he doesn't have game-changing speed once he catches the ball out of the backfield, but he was able to be a reliable receiver, a check down option for the most part. Like, I think last season he had 11 catches for 83 yards. Like, it was not, or no, that was a couple seasons ago. But anyway, he was not like big time playmaking, but he did show like enough there to give you some feel like, yeah, if you threw the ball to him more, he's going to catch it and maybe try and run over somebody. I'm also left feeling like still lacking a really good answer as to why someone like Khalil Herbert, or to a lesser extent D'Onta Foreman, isn't more effective as a receiver out of the backfield. Like, what is it about being the receiver there that those guys struggle with? You know, it's not like they have this massive history of like directly dropped passes, right? It's not like the ball keeps going through their hand every time the quarterback throws to it. Like, Foreman has 2 drops over the course of his career. I don't have Herbert's numbers in front of me, but it's not a drastic part of the game, right? It's not we sit there and go, oh man, Herbert just can't hold on to passes. That's not the issue. And we know that when both of those guys have the ball in their hand as a runner, they're very, very good. Like, they don't go down easy. They were both almost 1,000-yard rushers last year. Like, they're good at making guys miss and creating yards. So if they can catch the ball and they're good at running with the ball once it's in their hands, why doesn't that connect to being more effective as receivers? We had the same conversation a little bit about David Montgomery too. Like, I'm still left, because it's not like they're being asked, like running backs to the backfield are not running complicated routes. You know, most of the time, with some exceptions, but like most of the time, you're kind of just flaring or swinging out of the backfield and trying to make guys miss after the catch. And I think that's what some of it is. And my working theory on this, that I don't have a lot to back up the theory. It's just sort of the idea that I've found that explains it the best in my head. But I'm certainly, if you have a better idea as to why these backs aren't as good as receivers, despite the reasons we talked about here. But like my thought is that so much of being a receiver after the catch is a very sort of quick decision. You catch the ball and you got to go. You're in the open field. You got to make a guy miss. You got to go 0 to 60. You got to accelerate, and you're on your own. There's no blockers in front of you most of the time. It's you versus a defender. You don't know exactly how close they're going to be. And when you're the running back getting a handoff in the backfield, you have a step or two before the quarterback gives you the ball where you're reading the defense and seeing the play open up. And then once you get the ball, you have another couple of steps before you get to the offensive line and have to make your cut, your read, your decision. There's more time to make that decision on a handoff than it is once you're as a receiver, you're watching the quarterback to catch the ball. You catch the ball, and then now you instantly have to know where to go. Like, you kind of have to almost be like planning where you go before you catch the ball, but still looking the ball in your hands to make sure that you catch it. And I just wonder if like it's that style of having to make a decision and explode and run like instantly, read and attack right away without having that run up and without having the blocks to read, without having the build up to that decision making point. If that's where those players end up struggling a little bit more, and it's the more like short area quickness type players and perhaps like quicker reactors, quicker, twitchier players that can be more effective as receivers in the backfield. I'm not satisfied with that as a perfect theory, but that's kind of the best answer I've been able to come up with as to why that doesn't quite work as well. But I don't think it explains it perfectly well. I would be curious to hear why you think players like Herbert and Foreman haven't been as effective as receivers, whereas other running backs are, and what it is about them versus effective receivers that make that more tough. Certainly leave us a comment on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel. You can tweet us at Locked On Bears. You can post in the Locked On Bears Facebook group. And we're working on a new way to have you become a part of the conversation via text message. We're going to have a new text service here for the Locked On Bears podcast where you're going to have some exclusive access to me If you want to ask questions for the podcast or even just one-on-one, hit me up on Bears information. We're going to have some exclusive content, some of the data from behind the scenes for these podcast episodes, some film breakdowns as well that are going to be exclusive to the Text Club members. We'll have more details coming out on that in the coming days here on the podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. We love our everydayers tuning in 5 days a week because we're back 5 days a week here in the Locked On Bears podcast. Tomorrow, we're talking to former NFL tight end Khalil Herbert about Cole Kmet, Robert Tonyan, Bears tight ends, how much they should pay Cole Kmet, what the tight end market looks like, and so much more. Really going to be, it's a conversation I'm really looking forward to recording here and getting up for you guys tomorrow. So tune back in for that because, of course, with Khalil Herbert, you're still going to have another opportunity to bear down.